Our first speaker today is Chris Coudray, the manager of New Hanover County. In January, the county began studying the idea of redeveloping an entire square block in downtown Wilmington. Project Grace would potentially modernize the downtown library and relocate the Cape Fear Museum to an adjoining space, as well as add apartments, shops, offices, a hotel, and parking. Chris is with us today to share more about this potential transformation. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
You know, I agree with Rob Kaiser in the Business Journal. This entire idea about redeveloping a city block, a block that all of us own as residents and taxpayers in New Hanover County, is a rather intriguing idea. But let's talk a little bit about what Project Grace is, and that's what your county government has referred to it as for the better part of a year. I want to introduce you to it for what it is, not how it's been co-opted in the narrative that it's been given by some in our community. But Project Grace, this intriguing idea, is all about taking the opportunity, and I think it's wonderful that we started this morning talking about optimism and opportunity. It's about taking the opportunity to redevelop, redesign, and reimagine an entire city block and how we can actually co-locate our main branch of our public library, our Cape Fear Museum, which is an asset as a resident and a taxpayer you own. To take an asset that's 12 blocks away from the heart of downtown and co-locate those in the center of a thriving community and create that cultural nexus and that nexus for learning and living. But it's not limited to that. It's accommodating the need of more commercial, residential, and retail space in downtown Wilmington. It's not a surprise to anybody. You have to look around and see that what Wilmington and New Hanover County look like today is not what New Hanover and Wilmington of the past were. We're growing. There are more people here today than a year ago or 5 years ago, and there are more people coming to our community. So we have a chance to use a city block to completely reimagine what development should look like. So what's on the block today? That's important to talk about. Our main branch is there. The main branch of our public library sits on that space today. As lovely and as outstanding as it is, and Harry Tuckmeyer's here, and I mean it in no disrespect, it is outdated for what the mid-21st century library user needs and wants. On that block is a new public park that you paid for to enhance the library experience, and I'm happy to share with you that park is actively used every day. But also on that block that we call Project Grace are two buildings, two old buildings. One of them is abandoned. There are several surface parking lots, and then there is a terribly underused public parking deck. So where this block sits, for those of you that don't know, is between 2nd and 3rd Street, between Chestnut and Princess. It's directly across from City Hall. We need to do something with that project. So those are really nice and interesting ideas, but really what's intriguing about Project Grace, this community is all about development and redevelopment. Well, I think what's intriguing about it is this entire public discourse about how to reimagine and repurpose public space. It frightens people. It makes people uncomfortable. I fully acknowledge that and accept that. We have made people in our community uncomfortable. When you talk about how to repurpose, reuse, and in some instances dispose of public assets, that scares people. When you think about the scale of this project and the partnership that we need to have with the private sector to make it work, I don't think it's lost on any of you that a partnership of that size and that scale is a completely new space for New Hanover County government. So combined with the concern and the idea that this is in a new frontier, a new space, that creates the intrigue and the curiosity across our community. But I really do believe that New Hanover County can and is committed to creating synergy that benefits our community, because we're committed to enhancing the overall economic and community prosperity. And I believe the redevelopment of this city block that accommodates public purposes that are important to our community, but also accommodates private investment for more people and more business that's going to be here, is the kind of synergy that our community needs. You see the definition of what synergy is. That's the Webster's Dictionary. But before we go too far with synergy, what does it mean for your county government to produce synergy? Well, when we talk about synergy, it's reimagining the services that we provide our people. It's reimagining the service our people want and need, and it's meeting them where they are and where they want to be, not where we think they are or where we think they need to be. And when we reimagine those services and we meet people where they are all along the way, what we're actually doing is transforming our community and making it better. We're making it stronger, and we're driving that community and economic prosperity that we all want and need. So when I talk about synergy, whether it's Project Grace or anything else that we do, that's what we're trying to drive for the benefit of our community. So synergy comes about through opportunity and challenges. And there are three big challenges that have presented to us the opportunity for Project Grace in the redevelopment, but they drive so much of what we do as a county government. First is stewardship of what we have. It's relevance of the services that we provide to our people now and in the future. And then it's that ongoing issue of growth, and more specifically, planning for effective growth and helping manage what development in the future looks like. So if those are the challenges, how is it that Project Grace actually helps us take on and create synergy with these challenges? So if there's the issue of stewardship, we have a public library and a Cape Fear Museum that's part of our asset base today. And I would submit to you that communities that are strong and vibrant have robust systems of libraries and museums. We need it, so we need to provide stewardship to it. We need to tend to them and nurture them. Relevance of these cultural and educational resources is important in the long term. Because we need them in our community, we have a duty to make sure that they are providing the service that people want and need, not only now, but in the future. And then it's the issue of growth. We have an opportunity to take a block that is owned by one entity, the county, but you're actually the owners of it, and use it to think about how to accommodate some of this future growth. We can deal with the cultural and the educational nexus and at the same time create the space because of the demand of people that are coming into our community. So from a stewardship perspective, stewardship of the library and the museum, in my opinion, begins with recognizing and understanding there's a lot more in common with these institutions than what is different about them. They share as part of their mission, the common drive, the underpinning of them is the commitment to collecting materials and resources and making them available to our community so that we can increase what we know, so that we can enhance our knowledge, that we can be a learned society. That's what is fundamental to their mission, collecting. They both have part of their mission conserving these very same materials and resources to make sure they're available today, yes, but also that these materials are here and available for generations to come. For children that aren't even born yet are going to have access to materials and cultural resources that help them learn but define the place that we are. And ultimately, they're public services. They're services that our community needs. They're services our community wants. I don't know of any great American city. I don't know of any great world city city that does not have as part of its foundation a system of free public library access, and we have that, and a system of museums to communicate and teach people about the place where they live, the place that they've come from, the place that they occupy. So our library and our museum share much more in common, and there's an obligation in my mind to co-locate those so that we can ensure stewardship. You know, the idea of these systems dividing into the museum and the library, these standalone big institutions that we know and love, that's a relatively recent phenomena, at least in the context of history. You know, maybe the 19th century, that kind of evolution where they separated into different things took place. So that's a relatively recent phenomena. When these facilities and these public services were created, they were done as part of the common good and about sharing resources. And so that's where stewardship long-term, the co-location of these makes sense for our long-term obligation for stewardship. I'm talking to our business leaders in the community, and I'd be remiss not to talk about the dollars and the cents. It is more cost-effective to co-locate two institutions that do different things but share common missions. It's more economical, more efficient. We can manage costs better if we co-locate those and have shared space, shared content, and shared archives. It's stewardship at its best to co-locate. As it relates to the long-term relevance of these facilities, we need them to be a part of our community, so we need to make sure long-term they meet the needs of our community. I'm of the opinion that the best way to ensure their stewardship is to actually combine them and create an opportunity for easy shared access to the materials in the content that is there. It will guarantee and ensure more public engagement in the long run. Again, it's about meeting people where they are and where they want to be, and they're going to want to be in downtown Wilmington. So this co-location ensures their long-term relevance. There's also the issue of growth. Let's talk a little bit about the growth facts as they are. New Hanover County is 199 square land miles. That's inclusive of the city of Wilmington and our 3 beach communities, 199 square land miles. The July estimate of population in our community, 227,000 people already live here. 227,000 people already live in our community. Communities that are not growing are dying. So growth is good for us. It's about our long-term viability. It's about our long-term economic prosperity. So we want to grow, but we recognize we're geographically limited and we already have 227,000 people here. So thinking about how to use land differently in modified development patterns is part of our long-term success. And if we're going to rethink how to use land, that means that there's an obligation and a duty for the public sector to think about how it uses public space as well to help accommodate the growth that is coming. So, future facts about the growth that are coming to us. Planning estimates are 120,000 new people will move to Wilmington and New Hanover County, 199 square land miles, by 2040. That's 57% growth by 2040. I hope to still be living in this community. I really hope to be alive, and then on top of that, I'd like to be living here. 2040 is not very far away. 65,000 of those people are going to want to live in what is the current geographic limits of Wilmington. So that means some of that 120,000, in fact, I would predict a goodly number of that 120,000 new residents are going to want to live in downtown Wilmington. So we have an obligation to help accommodate and plan for the growth that is coming into our community. Project Grace gives us that opportunity to ensure good stewardship and relevance for our important public resources, but it also means that we can partner with the private sector to do this, to do it right, and to do it well. I want you to know that you can trust your county government to take on this kind of partnership and to go into new space and territory it's never been. You can trust us, number one, because we've been building the capacity for 5 years to do governance of the future. What I would call new governance. New governance is about partnerships. And we've been building that capacity through the people we've hired, through the business processes, rules, or regulations that we've started, that we've stopped, and that we've changed. And we've been doing it through building the financial capacity to make sure that not only today, but well into the future for the generations to come, this community, from its governmental perspective, is financially sound. So you can trust us to do this because we're motivated to do public good. That's why we exist. We're here to benefit the community as a whole. That's part of our mission. It's part of why we exist. You can trust us because we have the capacity. You can trust us. You can trust us because we're committed to ensuring economic prosperity for everybody that's in this community now and the people that come in the future. Project Grace creates the synergy. It gives us the opportunity to firmly establish downtown Wilmington as the cultural and educational nexus for our community, accommodate the kinds of growth that's coming and meet the needs of those populations, and all the while enhance and develop the long-term economic prosperity of Wilmington in New Hanover County.
Our next speaker is Craig Heim, who this summer took over as CEO of the United Way of the Cape Fear area. Craig brings with him a wealth of experience working in United Way organizations around the country, as well as a new way of engaging with our community. Please join me in welcoming Craig to Wilmington and to the stage.
Chris is talking about partnerships. You only need partnerships if you're going to do big, bold things. And if you're going to do big, bold things, you need to think big thoughts. For some people, that's scary. Change is scary. We're going to talk about United Way, but we're going to talk about it not only as an institution, but as a process of working together in the community in a united way. Our community today is the product of previous generations and the choices and decisions that they've made. We've inherited that. They did a pretty good job. And we have pretty terrific leadership here today. We're the adults now that are going to make the choices and decisions that will determine the future for children and future generations, of course. I've had a chance to see our community in the context of other communities. This is the 9th United Way that I've worked with. I've worked with leadership in Philadelphia and Columbus and Pittsburgh and Syracuse. Tremendous leadership that came together to do big things. Silicon Valley, they didn't have community. I couldn't find the community. It was a place where it was growing so fast, people came to work there, they lived there, but the leadership didn't create community like I was used to in some of these other areas. And what I've found here, every community is dealing with the same equation. All of us have homelessness. All of us have substance abuse. All of us have violence. Issues that we're trying to deal with in the smartest possible way. It's not easy. But some communities are better than others, and I think it's how they organize their resources and how they aim and fire those resources in the community that can make the greatest difference. What's the role of a United Way in that? What's the role of charity? A lot of people think, well, you find the agencies that are doing the work that you know best for people that you care about the most, and you give to those organizations. Or is it organizing a community investment portfolio to look at the needs of the whole community and then organize those resources in a way where you don't have as many problems in the future? You're going to grow a community through the choices and decisions you make, through the leadership of that community. We're facing that puzzle as we have in every generation, and again, we've done a pretty good job, but we can do better. I've had a chance to see United Way and the evolution of United Way starting in the 1970s in Syracuse, New York. At that time, the United Way was a centralized funder of many wonderful community organizations. The community came together once a year for one campaign on behalf of so many wonderful organizations that were doing so much good work. And it was an efficient way of raising money in the workplace with a payroll deduction option, and people with greater wealth were able to give major gifts. The community came together beautifully. And we realized that's not enough. As good as that is, evaluating agencies, accountability for the dollars, a community coming together in a united way, it wasn't enough. We can be a community problem solver. But that's going to require individual agencies coming together and working together in a consortium of activities that could solve community problems. And it wasn't just not-for-profit agencies. It was the business community. It was government and so forth, working together. And then in the 1990s, we said we're more than that. We're a community builder. And I had the chance to present an idea called Day of Caring in 1991 to our trade association, United Way of America, in a project we had 2 months earlier in Pittsburgh, where we had more than 100 projects with CEOs working side by side with their employees. We had the Army Corps of Engineers working with the utility trucks to transform parks, and we took pictures before and after. A year later, we had more than 100 communities doing this Day of Caring, building communities, working side by sides, and we see that in our community in the Chamber of Commerce. It's a wonderful idea. It builds community. But we didn't lose these other aspects of the United Way by moving forward and unifying the community in a new United Way. This is what you see in every community to some extent or another. It's a fragmented fundraising approach. And you've annual dinners, galas, telethons. Has anyone received anything in the mail asking for money in the last couple of weeks? It's important. Respond to it. These organizations are doing great work. But what we're talking about is trying to bring it together in a way where it's more coordinated. Lower cost. Lower cost in United Way, it's a method of raising money that every community has because no one has yet come up with a better way to meet the needs of a community. Every community is like this. But the efficiency of a golf outing, for example, if you raise $100,000, but it might cost $40,000 to put it together. It's not efficient. But it's a great thing for that agency, and it has to be done because it lifts up that position of the organization to other people and brings in more volunteers. And by the way, they get $60,000. I've been to a number of galas here. They're critical. Even if we were raising a lot of money, we would still do this. Now, the last place I was in was Philadelphia. We raised $54 million, and that's not a fair comparison. But when I worked in the United Way in Syracuse, New York, it's a pretty good comparison to our four-county area. Here we have 466,000 residents. In Syracuse, there were 478,000. We have 12,000 fewer, but it's a good comparison. In Syracuse, when I left, we were raising $10 million. Here, it's $2 million. This is in the four-county area. What would it look like if we were raising $10 million in the community? Well, here's an example of what it looked like in Syracuse. We had 28 organizations that were receiving an allocation of $50,000 or more. Here's just 7 of the organizations. $900,000, $600,000. The Boys and Girls Club, $250,000. Here in our area, we have 2 agencies that receive an allocation of $50,000 or more. Yesterday, I was at the YWCA with the leadership from GE Hitachi. $170,000 in Syracuse. Here it's $13,000. Anyone that ever goes through that agency and meets the children and meets the staff and the volunteers, you couldn't walk out of that organization and say, this isn't worthy of my financial support. It's wonderful. Now, here is the fragmented human service system, not just in our community, but in every community. It's not coordinated. It's not coherent. It's a lot of wonderful things being organized, but not together as they should be. No architect ever looked at our human service system and said, you know, we could organize it in a different way. We could find the redundancies and duplications. We could find where there's gaps in services. And we do that to a certain extent in this community, but I've seen a much greater capacity for that in other communities, and it's smart, because it's a way of managing a community that makes the most sense. And what you find is that you get more money to the agencies that are doing the best job. Do we have the potential to raise $10 million in this area like Syracuse? Well, again, we have 466,000 residents in our 4-county area. There are 193,000 workers, people employed. Our United Way is currently contacting 31,000 people, in which 5,300 are contributing. The onus is on us. And we're not going to do it by getting better at asking people for money. We're going to be able to do this by getting better at presenting a case about our community, about the wonderful partners that are already here doing the job, and how it affects people's lives at a human level. And when we do that, and we do it well, people say, you got me. This makes sense. I'm willing to support it. In Philadelphia, I had 539 people who contributed $10,000. That's not a good comparison, but in Syracuse, there were 4 when I started and 44 when I left. We didn't win them over by asking them for money. We won them over by connecting them in the community in smarter ways, and it made sense to them. And here, when I came to the United Way, where there were 3 $10,000 givers, over the last two weeks, we picked up 2 more. We can do this. But it isn't just raising money. It's a smarter new approach to community organizing, where these are symptoms that are effects of a cause that happened many, many years before. We're going to start organizing our community resources to be able to get there before the accident happens, and that means starting with kids. We're going to organize our community portfolio around strong kids, strong families and individuals, and strong neighborhoods. And they relate together. If you want to do one thing to prevent these things from happening, start with children. And let's meet their requirements. How do you do that? It's not complicated, but it's not easy. We know what to do. Physically, mentally, spiritually, we know what to do. Physically, what are the requirements of children? Nutrients, vitamins and minerals, not what some kids are getting. And I mean prenatal, starting as the body's forming. I'm talking about once the baby's born, the equipment they're going to use to think. The brain is forming now. You can't miss this opportunity. If you do, you blow it. And then the next thing is getting them ready for school. Get them school ready. Now, what are the mental requirements? Numbers, letters, words, a safe lap to sit on. The ability to be able to read to them and have them read to you. Get on the floor and work puzzles. This creates pathways in the brain. And there's the spiritual component. Children we all live in little worlds, but children especially, you need to widen that world. How many kids don't see the ocean until they're 8 or 9 years old on a school trip? It's 20 minutes away, for heaven's sakes. Get them out into nature. Nature teaches. Let them see a night sky for the first time and try to explain what the stars are, those little lights. It's the ability to connect them to something larger than themselves and expand this world. Inspire them with the museums that we have, not later on, but early, before they go into school. It isn't complicated because we know what to do, but it isn't easy because, like any parent, you have to commit to 20 years, at least. And when we do that, when we meet the requirements of these children, most of the kids in this area are making it. They're growing up and they come back as leaders in this community, community assets, or they're a gift from Cape Fear to other communities because we know how to do that. But there's so many kids that we're missing. And when we meet those requirements, they make it. When we don't, they see Ben David and his brother John, and we read about it in the newspaper. And by then, it's not a missed opportunity anymore. It's a lost life. And the cost isn't money that I'm talking. I'm not talking about the $30,000 it costs us every year. I'm talking about the neighborhoods, I'm talking about the families, and I'm talking about that individual that could have been so great. We're smarter than this. So, what is the New United Way? It isn't an institution. There it is as an institution. It's a way of partnering in a community. The big player here is county government. We've got a smart one. The big player here is the business community. Media is fabulous here. If you've ever heard the vision coming out of the medical center here, it isn't just about the hospital system. It's about a force for wellness in the community. It's really enlightened, it's inspired, and it's smart. Not-for-profits, and what I'm missing here are churches and some of the service clubs that we have. We've got it all in this area, and one day there's going to be a community that's going to step up and say, we're going to do this. We're going to bring it to scale. Many kids are succeeding, but they're not all of the ones that should be. And to me, it's just a community making the decision to be able to do this, to move resources, still remediate problems, still try to fix broken things, but begin walking up the path so you can get there early on so the problems don't even occur. And we're human beings. Kids become teenagers, and what a problem that is. But they can make it. And we could do this. We could do this. I nominate Cape Fear.
Please join me in welcoming Olivia to the stage.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you today and grateful for the opportunity. So if there was a word of the year for 2017, I'm pretty sure it would be opioids. You can't pick up a newspaper, turn on the television, or look on any platform of social media without seeing something about opioids. Our region has been heavily impacted by the epidemic, and I'm going to take a little bit of time today to tell you about that, but more importantly, to tell you about how our community is responding. There are 4 things I want you to get from our time together today. The first thing that I want you to know is that, yes, we have a problem. We've had a problem. It just took a company in California to tell us that we had a problem for everybody to want to get on the same page to work together to do something about it. In April of 2016, the Castlight Health Survey, which is that company in California, named Wilmington as the #1 city in the nation for opioid misuse. #1 city in the nation. North Carolina got hit pretty hard by this survey. They named 25 cities in the United States, and 4 were in North Carolina, but we got that top distinction. So yes, we have a problem. But is it really as bad as #1 in the nation? Well, let's look at some of our local data that we know to be true. New Hanover County has seen nearly a 900%, yes, you read and heard that right, 900% increase in overdoses in the last 15 years. And heroin overdoses have increased by 322% since 2005. So wait a minute, I thought we were talking about pills. How are we jumping to heroin? Well, oftentimes, individuals who are addicted to pain medications often find their way using heroin later on in their addictions. And I fear that's going to get worse here in our region. We know that approximately 60% of inmates in our New Hanover County jails have been identified as individuals with substance use disorders. So if that one doesn't get you, how about this? At New Hanover Regional Medical Center, we've seen a 250% increase in our babies born addicted to substances since 2014. And for that #1 city in the nation for opioid misuse, we have 16 facility-based crisis beds. So what that means is for individuals who are ready to seek treatment and may need a level of care that require them to be in a facility-based crisis environment, we have 16 beds to treat them. Not in this city, not in this county, but in this region. So yes, we have a problem. The second thing I want you to know is that you're affected, and if you think you're not, you're wrong. Typically, when myself or colleagues do talks like this in front of groups like this, we ask people to raise their hands if they've been impacted by the epidemic, whatever impacted means to you. Maybe personally, maybe yourself or friend or family member, or maybe it's impacted the way you do your work. When we ask that question, we usually see about 75% of the audience raise their hands. If I asked that question today and you would not raise your hand, this is what I would say to you. You've just not been aware that you're impacted, or you've not been impacted yet. It's affecting your bottom line. Opioid users cost employers twice as much in healthcare expenses as their non-abusing coworkers. We know that employees who abuse opioids miss nearly 3 times more working days than their coworkers who do not abuse opioids. And sadly, we know that 81% of employers lack a comprehensive drug-free work policy, and only 19% of employers feel equipped to deal with this problem. We better get equipped, because their problem is here. You've probably seen it in some of your businesses. But it's not all bad. The third thing that I want you to know is that we have solutions. And notice that I said solutions, not a solution. It's important to remember that there is not a silver bullet for this epidemic. There is not one thing that we can do that's going to fix this. It's going to take a lot of things working together to do this. But we have solutions. And our solutions are about systems. Similarly to what we just heard from Craig, it's about our systems working together. It's about us getting out of our silos and working with each other to better support our community. We're really good at working in those silos and not thinking about how what we are doing is affecting what someone else is doing. We've got to stop that. We've got to start working together to better support our community. So what do I mean? Well, we could have all of the treatment providers in the world right here in Wilmington, but if we don't have transportation to get people to those treatment providers, it doesn't matter. We could be so good at treatment that everyone that enters our treatment programs would successfully complete and start their way into recovery, but if we don't have stable housing for those folks in recovery, they're not going to stay in recovery very long. We've got to start working together, and we're beginning to do that here. Did you know that in our region, over 80 entities, agencies, and organizations have come together to form a coalition to better align their resources, to better share their resources to help individuals who are seeking substance use and mental health services. And when I say agencies, organizations, and entities, I mean all of these systems. I mean multiple health systems, not just the one here in our county. I mean multiple counties. I mean public health. I mean our churches, our law enforcement, our courts. We have these folks that are coming together, that are beginning to work on this problem together. Did you know that in our community, our law enforcement, our first responders, they are working with behavioral health providers and in order to get drug users the best help that they need, and newsflash, that help is not jail. In our communities, we have churches who are learning about addiction and learning how to better treat their members of their congregation who need help. We have solutions. They're unique, they're innovative, and there's a lot more on the way. There's some big ones on the way that you're going to hear about soon. And the last thing that I want you to know is that you can help. And in fact, you have to help. We need you to help. Everyone in this room can do something today to positively impact this epidemic in our community. The first thing that you can do is thinking about medication safety. We know that 67% of individuals addicted to heroin in North Carolina began that addiction by using pain medications. And we know that about 70% of those individuals were abusing pain medications that were never prescribed to them. So when I say medication safety, I want you to think about this. Don't share your medications, lock up your medications, and dispose of your medications. And when I say dispose, I don't mean throw them in the trash. I don't mean flush them down the toilet. I mean take them to a safe location like a medication drop box to get rid of them. If you don't know what a medication drop box is, think about like a library book return. You walk up to the box, you open the slot, you throw in your medications, you close the slot, you walk away. Easy as that. We have them all over our communities. New Hanover Regional Medical Center has 3 in our region. If you don't know where these are, go to our website at www.nhrmc and we'll show you where they are all across the region. Today when you go home, go to that cabinet, go to that drawer, go to that box that we all have in our house and have hoarded these medications that we've kept for years. Get rid of what you don't need, get rid of what you don't use, get rid of what was expired, and take them to a medication drop box. The second thing you can do is educate yourself. We have got to stop treating mental illness and substance use differently than we do other chronic diseases because that's what they are. We've got to start treating those individuals We've got to stop treating those individuals differently than we do individuals who suffer from things like diabetes. Ask yourself, if your neighbor was diagnosed with cancer, what would you do? I assume you're pretty nice people, so what you would likely do is, take them a meal, offer to take them to an appointment, check in on them. Now ask yourself, if that same neighbor was diagnosed with a mental illness or was addicted to a substance, what would you do? You'd likely stay away from them. We've got to start being there for each other, educate yourself, and stop the stigma. And the third thing that you can do is you can be a solution. We know that right now, 72% of the individuals who are seeking treatment at our largest substance use provider in the region are unemployed, 72%. And we also know that jobs provide opportunity, hope, and resources for individuals, which are all vital for recovery. And then lastly, take care of the people that you currently have. Businesses that offer employee EAPs report a 40% decrease in lost time, a 60% reduction in sickness and accident benefits, and a 50% decline in filed grievances. So take care of your people. When I began, I said that there was 4 things that I wanted you to remember today. I hope you've now understood that, yes, we have a problem. It's not good. It didn't get here overnight. We're not going to fix it overnight. Yes, you are affected. Whether you realize it or not, you are. And if you're not, you will be. But we also have solutions. We're going to get this right. People are looking at us to get this right. People from all over the country that are also dealing with this, they're looking at us to learn from us and what we are doing because we're doing some really neat things. We're going to get it right. We're going to need your help to do it, and you can be a part of that. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Dr. Jennifer McCall, is the CEO of CTOX Research and a lecturer at UNCW. This year, her firm received a $1.5 million grant to further develop toxin tests for seafood. She is on the leading edge of our region's potential to become a center for marine biotech businesses. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer to the stage.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here to talk about what I think the potential is for marine science in our area. When we started CTOX, our goal was to create simple and easy-to-use tests for regulatory agencies to protect the commercial seafood supply. From marine toxins that are naturally occurring, they get in the seafood, and when you eat them, you get sick. And so our vision is that this will be used by regulatory people to protect public health being a passion of mine, given my other day job is as a lecturer or assistant professor in the UNCW College of Health and Human Services. It's odd when I say I'm a marine scientist, people tend to ask me if I do this. They say, I love dolphins and manatees and sea turtles. And I explain, well, I don't really get to interact with these creatures. I'm not that type of marine scientist, so they at least then expect that I dive, which I haven't done, don't really know how to do, and see amazing fish. A few years ago, you may have seen the memes that made the round on social media of careers and the common misconceptions that come with these careers. And I really like this one for me, because this is what most people think I do, swimming with dolphins, and sure that my mother thinks I'm out there boycotting things. But what I actually do, and what most marine scientists actually do, is spend a lot of time around a computer, because science is nothing without data. And so we're locked in a computer. And my life is even less glorious than that, in that what I actually do is look at goo. And a probably better term for this would be harmful algae or marine algae. And what I do is I collect samples, culture the samples, and I use analytical instrumentation to grind it up and see what's inside of it. And I do this for a couple of reasons. The first is for bioassay development, which is a fancy term for creating those tests that people can use to look for marine toxins and make sure seafood is safe. But the other thing I use it for is to look for natural product drug discovery. Natural products is a fancy term that pretty much just means a potential therapeutic from a natural source. And this picture here on the, I don't have a laser pointer, but there at the end, is somebody in a tissue culture hood looking for bioactivity of a natural product. Here's an example of one. For about 2,400 years or so, people have been brewing tea from willow bark and leaves, and for use as a pain remedy. And in about the 19th century, some chemists were able to isolate this compound, this natural product. They modified it because we scientists, we always think we can make things better. And they created acyl salicylic acid. Bayer marketed this as aspirin. This is one of the, it's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines for a healthcare system. And over 100 billion pills are consumed each year by this for pain, because it's safe and it's easy to get. Here's another story. This guy is Alexander Fleming. He's a brilliant scientist, but he's a mess. And he would look at, his research involved looking at Staphylococcus bacteria. It's an infectious pathogen. Maybe you guys have heard of MRSA. It's the same type of bacteria. So he was investigating Staphylococcus bacteria, and he decided, the story goes, he put his plates, this little round agar dish with the bacteria growing on it, put it on the shelf, went on vacation, left a window open, and he came back, and it was contaminated with mold. And the difference between a mistake and an innovation is when you look at this, do you say, oh, this is trash, and throw it out, or do you go, that's interesting? He went, that's interesting. And he found that the bacteria that was not near the mold still grew. But as it got closer to the mold, there was a zone of death where the mold was able to kill the bacteria. And so he thought that's interesting. And he did some chemical analysis, and he was able to pull out this structure. You guys know this is penicillin. This is 1928. And when World War II came along, penicillin saved countless lives of US and British troops. He also noticed, though, and we knew this long ago, he warned about if you use too much of it or you don't completely kill off the bacteria are able to develop resistance. And so he was very cautious about the overuse of penicillin. But we didn't listen. More on that later. Most, if not all, the antibiotics that we have today come from the soil. You can think of the soil as the English versus the French over the past 1,000 years or so, until recently, where it's a battleground. Bacteria versus fungi, fighting it out for resources. The 100 Years' War, English versus the French, warfare drove innovation. And so we saw innovations like the longbow. It's very similar with bacteria and with fungi in the backyard. They create chemical compounds to fight off the other people and to be better able to get resources. And so scientists, after the discovery of penicillin, would go around all over in their backyards. They would go anywhere around the world, find soil samples, bring them back to the lab, and see what's in them, and look for bioactivity of natural products. The problem is that we've overused these. So this picture shows two different plates of the same type of bacteria, and each round white disc holds some antibiotic. And you can see the little circles, little zones of death, as it spreads out on the plate on the left. The plate on the right, the bacteria has developed resistance. The World Health Organization calls this a global crisis. We are rapidly reaching the point where we will have infectious diseases we have not seen for 100 years, but we've been able to treat, that are no longer able to be treated. Tuberculosis. There are XDR, exclusively drug-resistant tuberculosis strains that are killing people. There is no cure. There are strains of gonorrhea that came out in England a couple years ago that all of the current first lines of medications, don't touch it. MRSA, if you get MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, if you get that, it's a skin infection, it's particularly nasty. Sometimes you have to go to the hospital and get an IV injection of vancomycin, which it's like a chemotherapeutic. It does not make you feel well. And it's a race. What are you going to kill first, the bacteria or the person? There are strains of MRSA that are now vancomycin resistant. Compounding this problem is that we have reached an antibiotic discovery void. There was a 20 to 40 year period, depending on who you listen to. This is a World Health Organization graph, which isn't showing up right. 20 to 40 year gap in new classes of antibiotics. We have not kept up with discoveries. We can't find new ones. Now, this was broken in 2010. About 4 new ones came out. One was linezolid, which actually does treat tuberculosis, so that was a good innovation that came out. But we're still, the World Health Organization has said, we are not keeping up with the pace of antibiotic resistance. They are able to develop it faster than we are able to find new antibiotics. So what can we do? I told you that all the antibiotics, or most of them that we have come from the backyard. But we're in Wilmington, and we have a different backyard. Recently, this story came out that found an antibacterial compound in ocean bacteria. The ocean is just the same battleground as your backyard soil is, but we haven't looked at it. We haven't tapped into it. We haven't ground up what organisms are there and looked for bioactivity, but we're starting to. And that's one of the things that I'm starting to do. I like my version of fungi, which is that little guy up there in the corner. It's algae. And algae, single-celled algae, is also going through a battle with bacteria. And they produce compounds that are able to limit bacterial growth. And so there are 100 million times more bacteria in the ocean than we have known stars. So we can start looking at this and finding new compounds. It's not going to prevent bacteria from developing resistance. But if we can find new classes of antibiotics, and if we can limit the spread of resistance, doing things that we know that we can do, like not overprescribing it, not putting it in our food, making sure we finish a course of antibiotics. So I liked what you said about throw out your codeine, throw out your antibiotics if you haven't eaten them, and if you have, make sure you finish them when you get a prescription. Then maybe we can meet the demand, because we are very, very quickly facing a dark age again, where you'll get an infection and it can't be treated. So what does this mean for us? We have incredible resources here in Wilmington. We have oceans, and we have our UNCW, which has a phenomenal marine science and marine biology programs. We have support initiatives here in Wilmington. I started here. I started my company here as a marine biotech company looking to capitalize and commercialize marine resources, bioassay development, and marine natural products. And one of my favorite stories is this picture in the middle. She's a UNCW student. Our students want to stay here. Our students want to start companies here, and we have the resources for it. And she graduated this year, 2017, and she just won a Young Social Entrepreneur Award for her test that she developed. It's called Fecal Finders, and it looks for human waste in water, which is particularly interesting considering last weekend we had a giant dump of, 70,000 gallons of sewage at Wrightsville Beach. Her test can look for that and see if you have contamination in your water, in your drinking water, in your beach water. And so what we need to do is make sure that we have our support systems in place to nurture students like her, people coming out of the university, people in our region that want to start marine biotech-related businesses, so that we can see this as a success for our region. Thank you.
Our final speakers today, George Taylor and Steve Barnett, are two of the entrepreneurs behind True Colors, one of our region's most unlikely ideas of the year. to create a for-profit brewery and restaurant run entirely by active gang members. The goal is to create a profitable business while simultaneously stopping violent crime. Please join me in welcoming George and Steve to the stage.
Mama, I'm getting ready to start a new job pretty soon. Oh yeah? Where at? At a brewery. It's gonna be ran by all active gang members. A brewery ran by all active gang members. Sounds pretty crazy to me. Oh yeah? My starting pay is $50K a year. That sounds even more crazier to me, son. As crazy as it may sound, I'm gonna chase this.
The conversation that Steve had with his mom a year and a half ago or so was one that a lot of people were having, including myself. Sounded like a completely insane idea. But what we're gonna do today is sort of step through the past year and a half, I guess it's been, something like that, and share with you some of the things that we've learned, what we've been through, and what we think is gonna happen over the next several months or years. This whole thing got sparked about 2 years ago. Actually, December 20th will be the 2-year anniversary when a 16-year-old was shot on the corner of Castle and 11th. And at the time, it read in the paper it was a gang shooting, and I didn't even know we had gangs in Wilmington 2 years ago. I live in Landfall, right? We don't really have that sort of thing going on. Or we have gangs maybe, but not that kind. You know, I was interested. I was like, you know, I started to dig into it, and the more I learned, the more it just was bizarre to me that there's a group of people in our city who thought it was a good idea to drive down Castle Street and wave a pistol out of a car and pull the trigger, right? So I reached out to Ben David, and I said, hey, who the hell is in charge of this? Who's the top dog in the gangs, right? I want to meet this guy because this is stupid. And Ben was kind enough to hook me up with the gang task force, who connected me with guys that they thought were top dog in the various gangs in town. And what you'll see here, we have in Wilmington, we have primarily 3 gangs. We have Bloods, Crips, and Gangster Disciples. And underneath them, there's roughly 650-ish validated gang members. So, you know, it's a pretty good group of people. And so I spent the better part of last year hanging out with gang members, gang leaders, trying to understand why would someone wave a pistol out of a car and shoot somebody, and trying to just sort of understand the culture and what was driving gang violence and all that sort of thing. And we got together and traveled around the country, looking at other cities and what they were trying to do about it, all of them which were nonprofit and dealt with a completely different demographic than us. They were looking for aged out guys that were leaving the gangs, 35 to 45, and different clientele entirely. The guys I'm working with are 18 to, Steve's old, he's like 32, we tease him about it. But entirely different group of people. They are not broken people, they are headstrong, they're smart, they're aggressive and energized. You know, it's a different type of person entirely. So we started putting together meetings and bringing these guys together. And we'd have meetings at Untapped where we'd have 60 or 70 gang members all active in the same room talking. And Steve, maybe can you talk a little bit about your experience, like when we first told you to come, and there's this white dude who is thinking about starting a brewery, right, hiring these guys for $50,000 a year and flipping the whole gang thing upside down and making them a positive part of the community. What was the talk on the street?
Surprisingly, everybody was actually all for it. Every hood that I went to, the north, the south, the east, they were all trying to figure out ways they can get involved with this. Right. We saw this as an opportunity for peace. And we saw this as an opportunity for stability and a way for us to get money and not be on the corner looking over our shoulders anymore.
Yeah, and I thought that was one of the more surprising things, because I mean, we've got guys that were shooting at each other coming together for a meeting anyway, and we're talking openly about, I mean, raw about race and violence and drugs and gangs and, you know, all this stuff. And for the most part, everybody was willing to have the conversation and listen. And from that, I learned three things, I think, that really began to make me think that this crazy idea of starting a for-profit business hiring gang members could work. One is that I went into this thinking that gangs were like the mafia, right? You know, there's just some kingpin, maybe out in Compton or somewhere, badass dude who controls everything. And, you know, and their primary goal is to be an organized crime organization. And I found it's not true at all, actually. And as you can sometimes see in the newspaper, they're really not very good at crime. I tease them about it. Yeah, they get picked up quite a bit. But what I learned was they're really much more like a fraternity, and I know that sounds absurd, but it's true. If you look at the core, and there are, you know, like in your businesses, you have mission statements and vision statements. Gangs have the same thing. Like there is at the core what they stand for, and always it's brotherhood, loyalty, and community. And there's all sorts of, and I'm not for a minute trying to underplay the negative things that go on in gangs, and we'll get to that in a minute, but that's where this stuff started, and to a large degree, it's still a big component of these gangs. And maybe to give an example, if you can talk a little about why did you join the gangs? How old were you? How'd you get into it?
Well, I was 17 when I became a Blood, George.
Right.
Grew up in a single-parent home. I have 3 sisters as well. My mom, thank God for her, she held out in the household how she could, but it really took away her time from raising me how she could. So she invested more into my sisters. I'm not knocking her for that at all. But, you know, there were male role models, male figures for me that were out in the hood. They were Bloods as well. Those were the guys that I looked up to. I was 18 with a child on the way. I went and told them about it before I told my mom. So I really looked up to these guys. That's the brotherhood that we had. You know, they fill different voids for me. I didn't have a father, so one of them was playing father for me one day. The other one could be big brother for me the next day. But that was significance in having those guys around for me.
And that's a common thread. You hear it all the time when I talk to these guys. You know, how'd you get in? Why'd you get in? It's a very common thread. The second thing I began to learn was that in most of the violence, and I guess this wasn't too surprising, but most of the violence that goes on in gangs is related to the drug trade. You know, if you're going to sell drugs, you're in a violent business. It's going to happen. But again, what I didn't understand is that probably only 25%, and this is my estimate, and I've talked to police and they've said, yeah, that could be about right. Nobody really knows this statistic, but I believe in our town, only about 25% of gang members are doing illegal activities regularly. The rest are in our high schools. They're working in fast food restaurants. They're working in our grocery stores, or they're not working at all. But that was an important part to me. Again, getting back to this whole thing is not about organized crime. And then the final thing that was really important to me that I learned is that I always figured that the big, you know, honcho out in Compton or wherever was where all the drugs came from. And that that the gang leadership was invested in the drug trade, and that's not true either. The distributors are not members of these gangs. And that was a key piece for me, because then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, if that's the case, then leadership's not invested in the drug trade. And if it's just about economics, if the reason those 25% is just are selling drugs, it's just an economic solution to their problem, then maybe we really could start a business, a for-profit business, and trade out drugs for beer. And so, you know, right? I mean, it sounds absurd, but and at this time in the stage, I really wasn't sure. Nobody was. It sounded kind of crazy, but that was sort of where we started going. And so we had these meetings that continued into the end of last year, where we basically, my son George and I would get up and give this startup pitch. It was just like I was pitching investors for one of our startups. And like this is our first slide from the first deck, which is a pretty shitty slide when I look back at it. But this was how we opened the meeting, and we had Doppelganger as the name of the brewery, and if you look it up, you'll see why. But you know, that's sort of the way it went. So George and I would stand up there and, you know, point at these slides and this sort of thing, trying to get these gang members to understand what was going on. And then, you know, we'd go through and say, we're going to start a brewery, we're going to pay all this money. It just all sounded like awesome, right? And so we always put in this one slide that showed, if we do this, it's going to be incredibly difficult. Startups suck in the beginning. They're so hard. You have to be committed to what you're doing. And so this is a slide I use a lot when I talk to somebody. You know, growth is effing hard. And you have no idea how hard is. And what it's showing is in the beginning, startups are awesome, everyone's feeling great, and then you launch, and then you fall down into this trough. And I believe if you can get out in the first 10 months, you'll live. If you don't, you die. And so I'm going through this, and Steve, you had like a really cool, it was just a really amazing moment where he related this to gangs, and if you could share that.
While George was giving us a sales pitch about why we should start this brewery and how crazy we look sometimes doing what we do, it resonated with me because I saw my life as a gang member. At the book, before Startup Point, that's me before I became a Blood. At the top, the initial enthusiasm, that's me when I'm active, fully engaged in everything that's going on. The girls, the money, the pride, the influence. It was an all-time high for me for the most part. But then I caught a criminal background. I got a charge. Reality set in for me. I missed my first child being born. And I'm stuck down there in this trough for the next 7 or so years, bouncing around trying to figure out how I'm getting out of it. I got kids now. I need to find some stability. And I just couldn't figure it out.
And that's, you know, so the way this really went down, we have this meeting, it's all these gang members, and opposition gang members. And he's here, and he's saying that, and he's like, he gets pissed when I say this, but it was really impactful. Like he's sitting there looking at this thing, and he said, the problem is I've been bouncing along the bottom of this truck for 7 years, and I can't figure out how to get out. And he's tearing up while he's doing it amongst his rival gang members. I gotta tell it, because it's important, right? But I mean, that shows like where we're at. And meanwhile, so we have all these guys in there, and so maybe talk like about, we had this gang summit, we used to call it, when we would have all these guys come together. Like, what was that like? We had all these opposition gang members in there, right?
That was big. It's a Saturday, and the Untapped office is closed. But you got at least roughly 50 to 60 guys sitting in one spot right now, and I know it's active beef still going on in the streets. Part of me was telling myself, man, be careful, because some of these guys might be strapped, man. They're your brothers, you love them, man, but you just don't know how this gonna go. You don't know how they're feeling in the moment. But surprisingly so, everybody was active and engaged into the conversation that we were having. And I think that was a defining moment for us, that we all had wanted the same thing. We all were looking for peace. We were all looking for stability.
And I think, you know, the thing that I learned from that and just having all these guys together is that, like, there are some truly evil people out in the world, certainly, but most people aren't. And, you know, environment and opportunity drives behavior and outlook. And it's amazing the way, like, these guys, I know things that were going on in the streets in that environment, and they'd come into our office or to work with us on things, and they're just like any other employee. Well, not in the beginning. It takes a couple of weeks, but generally, I mean, it's remarkable. So we decided after that, George and I were talking, like, man, this could possibly work. Let's run a test. So we hired these 3 guys. It's kind of sketchy looking, right? And we hired them at Untapped, and this is one of the things I love about Untapped and all the companies that I work with, is they are incredibly, our team is just super open, and there are not many places you can put active gang members into a company and have it just be seamless, and Untapped absolutely did that. But we put them in there, and we decided, well, they're really good. These guys are really good at selling stuff on the corner, right? What if they could sell business software? So we're selling analytical software, promotional software, this sort of thing. We chuck them into the regular training program, and off they go. And so, Steve, can you talk a little bit about like the first day or week or month of being in sales training?
Untapped was definitely a challenge for me in the beginning, because this wasn't McDonald's or a construction site where my physical gifts or abilities would get me, you know, to the point of advancement, you know, making more money. This was a mental grind. I had to dedicate myself in a whole nother way. But I want to shout out my guy Chandler, man, for sticking by my side, man, and just making sure I got it done, man. He brought me up to speed. That culture at Untapped is amazing, man. It was just so inviting, and they embraced me from the moment I came there. So one of the funnier stories is on day 1. This is the very first day. It's not about him. It's not about him. It's about another guy. Right. But it's funny. So we're sitting there. It was to me, not to the guy. But we're sitting in there, and it's these 3 guys, and then a bunch of young millennials. Maybe a dozen people altogether, and no one really knows what's going on yet. And one of these guys, ankle bracelet goes on. He's banded. And when the battery goes low, the thing goes bonkers. And so everyone's looking around, what the hell is that? And anyway, he's like going, like trying to get out of the room like this, trying not to show the people next to him that he's wearing a band. I thought it was funny. He probably laugh at it now.
Yeah. Anyway. The remarkable thing was it worked. They sold software. They never even knew what software was, and it worked. And not only that, one of the guys, I think, still holds some records on the sales team. He's now with the brewery, but it was really amazing. And today, even still, they're three of the most favorite people when they walk into Untapped, everyone's hugging them and saying, hey, how you doing? So that was pretty remarkable and surprised the hell out of me. And we started thinking, well, maybe we just got lucky, right? Maybe these three guys, as sketchy as they look, were unusual. So two things, that, and then I wanted to make sure if we were going to go forward that the leadership of the gangs within Wilmington were into what we were doing. They would support it, they would back it. So we had this idea that we might hire the leadership. These are the guys that lead all the gangs in this town. And so I reached out to them, interviewed with them. I knew most of them by now, and had some of the most amazing, like, entrepreneurial. I would say that certainly a top 5 entrepreneurial conversation I had with one of these guys about the drug trade. It's like eyes locked for 20 minutes back and forth. And at the end, I'm like, dude, you got to quit doing this. You got to come work with me. You can make a lot of money. He's super smart, super aggressive, really great guy. And so we ended up putting together this thing we called the Hero Program. Hired all these guys for 50 grand, as Steve said. Got to compete with street money to be real. Told them that if they succeeded and we get this business launched, and if they were to take a leadership position, they could make twice that. And we're going to put together this 2-month program. It's going to have 3 tracks. We're going to teach about life skills, because for us, life skills are finance, transportation, housing, and relationships. If you get those 4 things straight, then life can be pretty solid. We're also going to teach startup skills, and we're going to teach beer. How do you brew beer? Because eventually we got to do that, right?
It's a brewery.
It's a brewery. Yeah, it's a brewery. And so we brought in a whole bunch of people to help train. There's a group out in San Francisco called Tim Draper runs. He gave us a curriculum to start with. People like Tony Robbins heard of us. It's ridiculous. Like, we try to keep this quiet, and friends will tell somebody or a friend or whatever. Tony Robbins sent his right-hand person to come and train these guys. Trying to think who else was there. They pitched the Wilmington Investor Network, which was insane, and Wilmington Investor Network wants to invest in them. Amazing, right? We learned how to brew beer. We did the Dave Ramsey financial peace thing, like just so many things we did. And these are some pictures just from that. You can see in the bottom center, that's pitching the Wilmington Investor Network. We learned about beer. A lot of hard work went in, and it was amazing what was going on. And then we also did a lot of fun things, trying to just sort of expand people's mind. You can see Cam Newton has been super supportive. We went down to Charlotte and played kickball with Cam, and we were at Cam's gala. What else did we do? We went racing go-karts. Anyway, a bunch of cool stuff. But at the end, what we said is, or the question was, how we wondered how this was going to work. And maybe, Steve, you can talk about, so now we've got 12 people, I think it was, or 11 people, in a conference room, if you saw the picture before, now having to work together. Like, what was that like? You're sitting across and having to work day in and day out with these guys that you didn't always get along with.
Okay, so at the summit, that was the moment of truth. Maybe we all have the same thing in common. Maybe we want the same goal. But the first day of the Hero Program was different, because it's like now we have to apply ourselves. Now we have to start getting things done. Well, a guy who I had smoked with back in the day, first place he comes and sits is beside me. We here for the same thing. Let's make this happen. I love you, brother.
Yeah, and that stuff went on and on. It was crazy. I mean, there was plenty of fights in the beginning, too, arguments and loud voices. That doesn't go on anymore, but it was like that. But the most important thing, and I'm going to speed up because I'm already getting the hurry up from Rob over there. But the 3 things that what I said is, if you guys succeed in these 3 categories, then we're going to go ahead and start this brewery. 1 was discipline. Can you show up and be there on time, do the work? 2 was knowledge. Can you close that knowledge gap? Because there was a huge, like, these are smart guys. They got street smarts. But business is different. You need to learn. And then 3, do you really have influence? Because, I mean, that's what I was interested in. Do you have influence over the roughly 600 and some gang members underneath you? And the measure we used for that was, I don't want to see a single shot fired by any of your guys from the moment you get on their payroll, which was July 5th was when most of these guys came on. And in Wilmington, in the summer in particular, it's unheard of to not have a gang shooting with some regularity. What happened in the program, there wasn't one shot fired. And not only that, I know many examples where my guys went out and said, hey, you know, we're not doing this anymore. Put the gun down. We have opportunity. We'll settle it another way. So that, in all three cases, discipline, knowledge, and influence, they succeeded. So came out of that program feeling pretty good about it. Went into another sort of 40-day cycle, and I'm going to run through this kind of quickly. But our goal for this was to build confidence and open their minds a bit. And so we did, and trust the process. We have this whole thing, trust the process. It's time, it takes time, all this sort of thing. We went to New York. You can see Steve on the far left speaking to about 1,000 students up in Newark, New Jersey at this place called St. Benedict's, which is an amazing place. Did a lot of stuff to just show these guys what it's like to think big and do amazing things. We also have this thing where we make them all jump out of a plane. Now, most of these guys have never flown. So like all these guys can say they've taken off in a plane but never landed, which is pretty cool. Steve,
I feel like you guys are judging me right now.
So it gives you an idea of what we're doing. And I'm going to step it on up here because I want to get to a couple of important points. We've since done something called Battle of the Bosses, which is like Shark Tank, and it's a way for the True Colors team to sort of hone their skills on smaller projects. They're now delivering or coaching 3 winners from our contest, what will be 2 restaurant owners and a laundromat owner, and getting those businesses launched next year. We've also launched this apprentice program, which is something I want to just quickly share. Like, for us, I've got about 30 to 40 gang members that I think are going to be excellent employees, but I don't have a position for them now. And so we've started this thing called the apprentice program, and anyone who wants to get into True Colors has to go through this for at least 2 months. And so what we do is we hire them and we contract them back out to places like construction companies or car washes or landscapers or something of this sort. We take care of it. We make it super easy on the employer, and it does 2 things. It lets me bring in some guys and get them employed so that they can, start living a normal life and have a normal paycheck. And for us, it's also a great way for us to train them up and get them ready for the brewery. So if there's anyone in the room that's interested in more detail around this program, please reach out to us. We've got 30 people that we expect to place between January 1st and mid-February or end of February. So if you guys have any kind of jobs like that, that would be awesome. Lastly, I guess I'll just touch on, kind of where we're at now. The teams come together. There's lots of buzz on the street now. I feel like we've sort of tipped a little bit where everyone, at least in the hood, knows what we're doing. People are actually starting to believe that, it's a real thing, which is awesome. All the gangs are coming together now, not just in our office, but I see them on the streets where you've got a Blood and a Crip hanging out on the same corner, talking to each other, not selling anything. And that's a big deal. And so just to wrap up before Rob gets upset with me, this is the current leadership team at True Colors. Most of them, if not all of them, are sitting over there. I'd encourage you guys, if you have time, if you don't have to rush back to the office, go talk to them. They all have amazing stories. They're fun to talk to. Break the ice. What was it like to drop out of a plane the first time you went up, right? Easy conversation. I would recommend you do that. So that's kind of where we are. Thank you.
Stay true.
Yeah.
Thank you. If we could please have a round of applause for all of our speakers today. Just wanted to thank everybody for supporting the Power Breakfast series, and we will see you next year.